Hi, I'm Dr. Ruchi Dana. I'm a medical doctor and a Stanford MBA. I'm currently in Dubai. I represent Dana Family Office, through which we make investments mainly into the healthcare sector, but we're also looking at other investments mainly into like pre-IPO deals, opportunistic funds, and some of the micro VCs as well. Today, I'm really excited to be here. Thank you so much, Wholesale Investor, for giving me this opportunity to be here to give this keynote. I would talk mainly about the healthcare sector and how it has been affected during the times of COVID-19. I would stress a little bit on personalized medicine and genetics because that's one of my favorite topics, and we've made a lot of investments in these sectors. But apart from that, if you look at like just in general how the healthcare sector has evolved during COVID-19, it has made a huge shift in terms of like getting into AI, getting into like the new technologies. Telehealth has taken up in a very big way. So most of these technologies were still around before COVID-19, but it's just because of COVID-19 that things have certainly accelerated into like getting into the new domain and getting into the adoption by doctors and consumers at the same time. But still, there are certain challenges that we see in the healthcare sector. And for example, to give you one simple challenge, telehealth had really taken over how appointments were made in the Middle East and overall worldwide. But slowly, we are seeing as the cases of COVID-19 are going down, there is less adoption for telehealth. Telehealth is going down, and people are again trying to go to the doctors for their appointments because there's this personal touch and the human touch that's missing in technology. And one of the other reasons that we see that telehealth is declining these days is because hospitals don't really want telehealth to take over. Because whenever a patient goes physically into a hospital, he would, go to the canteen. The doctor might advise certain lab tests. He would go to the pharmacy, get his medicines and all. So that entire component is missing in telehealth, because in telehealth it's just the consultations and the hospital journey ends there and then, and the revenue streams end there and then. So these are certain challenges that we are seeing in the telehealth sector. I think it's crucial to think about all the stakeholders that will be involved in certain sectors. Like, for example, when you talk about telehealth, it should be patients, doctors, hospitals, the pharmacies, the laboratories, the canteen that's there in the hospital, the cafeterias, the nurses, and all the workforce that's involved in these operations. I think, like, if you think about all of those things, there should not be like much of job losses. There should not be much of stoppage or disruption in terms of the revenue cycle. That's when it will be a win-win situation for all the stakeholders, and there'll be a lot of adoption for such things. So I think like it's a time to think about innovative ways in which like we can help in adoption of new technologies, but at the same time consider and keep in mind all stakeholders that might not benefit from the technology as such, but find a way for them to be benefited in one way or the other. So when we think about genomics and personalized medicine, that again has taken up in a huge way. There was a trend going forward in this direction, because of COVID-19, there's a lot of focus on these things. And one of the things I've realized, I was recently on an all doctors panels, and the doctors were saying that suddenly the patients are so much more adherent to the medicines that we give. So like all the patients, all the consumers, they're so much more careful about their own health, because we saw with COVID-19 that there's a lot of more morbidity with chronic conditions, with people who have pre-existing conditions. So people are trying to take more and more care of themselves. They're trying to go for like immunity boosters, and they're trying to go ahead for genetic testing, microbiome testing, and see like what's their level of immunity, what are the drugs or therapies that they can take to actually boost up their immunity. So like personalized medicine and precision medicine are sectors that are getting a lot of attention these days, not just from consumers but also from investors. And one of the challenges that precision medicine had initially was that it's very difficult to scale such approaches. But I think like as we are moving forward with such a huge momentum in this direction, people might think about new and crazy ideas to solve these challenges, because there is suddenly a lot of adoption from the consumers. They're willing to pay a price, a premium, to actually get personalized medicine and go ahead with advanced therapies like cell and gene therapy as well. So these are things that are very, very expensive. A lot of investors used to shy away from such domains, but because of the adoption that we are seeing, because of the pull that's coming in from the consumers, people are now trying to explore these areas in a big way. One of the challenges when we think about like advanced therapies like cell and gene therapy is that like manufacturing becomes a huge challenge, because they need like huge clean rooms and cold rooms to do the entire manufacturing and scale up these operations. So I think there would be certain countries that might benefit from the huge momentum that we are seeing in this space. For example, countries in which like they can set up huge facilities. Those would be the countries that might be emerging as winners for advanced therapies. When we think about genetic and microbiome testing, one of the things that we realized even during COVID-19 was that like microbiome actually affects has a lot of role to play, not just in COVID-19, but in general for a lot of like wellness of a person and the diseases of a person. So the microbiome is the gut flora that's there in your gut, and there are good microbiome and bad microbiomes. And if we are able to balance and get the right index out of those, then we can actually boost our immunity and try to like even overcome certain diseases that might be there, or that we are at risk for. And if we combine that data, the microbiome data, with the genetic data, then we actually get a lot more informed knowledge to even take decisions that would affect us in a big way. So genetics and microbiome has had a huge role to play, not just in terms of immunity, but also in terms of like taking care of people who had certain pre-existing conditions, like giving them the right kind of prebiotics. Probiotics is actually helping them in a long run. Yeah, studies have shown that even diabetes is something that can be actually like helped with the help of the right probiotics and prebiotics. Similarly, there's a lot of focus on rare diseases, especially in the Middle East. If you look at the scenario here, there are a number of rare diseases that emerge. One of the reasons for the high prevalence of rare diseases here in this region is because like people tend to marry within their families, and that causes like a lot of genetic disorders. So again, like having like testing done. There's also like a concept of premarital testing, genetic testing, and that's mandatory in some of the countries in the Middle East. So such things can actually help us in the long run, because eventually, if you have these rare diseases, they cause a lot of burden, not just on the families, on the society, but also on the healthcare system as a whole. So having such checks and balances in place could help us in the long run. And I think like when you talk about the new trends in terms of AI and big data, I think like genetic data is one of the most like biggest form of data possible in the healthcare sector, and we still even have we have not even come to the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more genetic data available. There's so many more parameters that you can add to the genetic data. For example, you can have the genetic data of a person, then the microbiome data, and then the health records, and like overall history of a patient, the age, sex, and like what's the activity level. These days, because of variables, you can have multiple data points, and if we are able to consolidate all of these data points at a given point and do some clinical studies to see like what's the effect of exercise on people who had these phenotypes and genotypes, and like what's the effect of exercise on people who had these microbiome flora in their guts. I think like there are a lot of more things that can emerge out of such studies. One of the things that we saw was that there's a lot of lack of data when it comes to genetic data, especially in the eastern part of the world. So like in the West, you see that there are companies that actually do your heritage testing, your genetic testing, but like in the eastern part of the world, there are not many companies that do that, because there's not enough data to actually give out any useful information to the consumers. So like the companies are still trying to figure out like how do we attract the end customers to actually so that they can actually pull up the data and utilize that data not just for clinical studies but also for like giving out the general information about the heritage and even helping out later on in terms of like useful clinical studies and useful drug repurposing and repositioning. One of the other things that AI has helped quite a lot in is medical imaging, and medical imaging could be radiology, pathology, any form of diagnostic utilization in which like there are a lot of images and the AI can actually compare the images and come up with a diagnosis or a prognosis of a disease. So these things have been around for a long period of time, but the adoption hadn't been too much. But these days we see like as there's like the concept of telehealth and people are doing remote patient monitoring and like even for second opinions the doctors are trying to like just send the digital images through to other doctors. So I think there would be a huge trend coming forward in terms of like utilizing the image data for a proper AI diagnosis. We also saw that one of the uses of AI could be in the overall workflow management of a hospital. So like when there were certain lean times when telehealth was taking over and there are a lot of like hospital beds that were over occupied because of COVID-19, and then suddenly there was a dip in the utilization of hospitals. There were a number of software companies that were working on like overall utilization of hospital resources in a better way. So that's one component in which like I've seen a number of startups emerge. One other field in which we saw a number of startups emerge was remote patient monitoring. So when it comes to like wearables and like generic data like blood pressure, blood sugar and all, there is a lot of data available, but like because of COVID-19 that data was not getting transferred to the doctors. So these days there's a lot of focus on remote patient monitoring, so you can actually you don't even need to visit the doctor. You can have that all data collected within your devices and then relayed it on to the doctor, and you can even get an alert if there's something wrong happening with the data. And also, I've seen a lot of focus on elderly care, and not just because of COVID-19, but even before that. So, like, there are a lot of AI-enabled devices, IoTs, that actually help in terms of like even predicting a fall of an elderly person, or like looking out for them and helping them out when they have a fall, or if somebody. There are also AI detection devices that can actually detect if a person did not get up from his seat for a long period of time or did not get up from the bed for a long period of time. So I think these are meaningful uses of AI in the healthcare sector, and I cannot wait enough to see like what the future would hold. AI is also used in terms of like drug discovery and drug repurposing. I think like initially in the biotech field, it used to take a lot of time to actually come up with a new drug and do the clinical studies and all. But because of AI, the wells can actually be done with the help of machine learning. You can actually repurpose the drugs and even come up with new drugs with a much shorter time duration. So that's helping quite a lot. One new area that I recently saw for the use of AI was pathology. So when you talk about pathology, like the slides that pathologists use to diagnose diseases, those slides, even after use, can be stored and are usually stored in places in the medical records, and also like later on with that historical data, you can actually run a number of studies. So this is one new use of AI that I've seen recently, that people are using, clinics are using old pathology slides to actually come up with data and clinical studies. So that's like it has been a huge help for clinical research organizations, and I've seen a few startups work on that aspect, because again it's image data that's there, and you already know what happened to the patient later on. So instead of like spending a lot of time prospecting about how a patient turnout might happen. You can actually look at the previous data and see what the patient is doing these days, and then you can even take it forward to the next like 5 years or so. So I think these are the main factors we saw in the digital health sector. Apart from that, in medical devices, there's a lot of innovation happening. There's a lot of focus on robotics. So robotic surgery has been around for more than 25 years now, but like the cost of these robots is so huge. So these days there is some sort of innovation happening to develop low cost robotic surgery solutions, not just for the operation theaters but also for like manufacturing of medical devices, lenses, and things in which you need a really sterile environment. Robots can actually do quite a lot. And even in the operation theater, robots can help quite a lot, because like the chances of like infections reduces. You don't require so much manpower in the operation theater once you have like a robot to assess the surgeon during the surgery. So I think like that's again a sector that looks promising. And apart from that, there are a number of medical devices that are developed by 3D printing that are again like sterile and can actually help in the long term. I think COVID-19 was a wake up call, not just for the patients, for the consumers, but even for the doctors. And we have realized how nimble the entire environment is, and how much we should actually have a backup for things, for example, for resources or ventilators or beds. And also I think like robotic surgery could help quite a lot in terms of having a proper utilization of these resources, freeing up resources, freeing up nurses, doctors, who can actually help out in for the more needy patients in the time of COVID-19. So these are some of the trends that we have seen in the healthcare sector. One of the other things that I saw was that there was a huge need for cybersecurity, because as we went into telehealth and remote patient monitoring, as doctors were like trying to work from home and all, there were a number of cases in which like machines were compromised. In fact, there was a ransomware case in the US in which like the hospital had to pay the ransomware to get hold of the data back again. So there would be some sectors in the cybersecurity space, in the healthcare cybersecurity space, that might emerge as winners in the near term, because there has been a sudden like so many ransomware attempts that have happened, not just in the healthcare but other sectors as well. But healthcare is something that's very private. You cannot like let the data go. And having secure data and the right steps in place could actually help companies in the long term. So there is a need for good cybersecurity startups in the healthcare sector. I think that sums up most of the trends that we have been seeing in the healthcare sector here in times of COVID-19. Apart from the vaccines that we are all aware about, there's also a need for instead of the physical vaccination cards, there's a need for actually having a digital vaccination card. So I think that's one space in which like a number of people are working on. They're trying to use blockchain for such digital health passports as well. So we'll see that how that turns out in the near future. There might be need of like booster doses of COVID-19 vaccine as well. So that's something that we are looking forward to. I think that sums up most of my observations in the healthcare sector, and I'm really excited to be here. Thank you so much, Wholesale Investor, and thank you, Emergence, for calling me out, for giving me this opportunity to give this wonderful keynote. I'm really excited to be here, and I am here to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.